Hi, everybody. It's Peter Roby again, and this is blog number 3, and it happens to be December 1st of 2011, and we're through with the holiday season with Thanksgiving being behind us, and hard to believe that it's December 1, but before we get fully into following all of our winter sports teams, I wanted to just take a moment to reflect back on the fall and make sure that we appreciate the accomplishments of our fall teams because there's a lot to be proud of. We had the 4 teams that have competitions in the regular season in their conferences for postseason play. Those 4 teams actually all qualified for their conference CAA championships, and we were one of only 2 teams in the CAA to actually accomplish that feat. Delaware was the other, so there's a lot to be proud of there. Men and women's soccer, field hockey, and volleyball all qualified for postseason play in the CAA. And in addition, field hockey was fortunate enough to be selected as an at-large bid to the NCAA tournament, and volleyball completed their regular season with a 21-5 record. So they had a phenomenal year. We had a number of teams that had all-conference players selected, Rookie of the Year in that group as well, and we even had an All-American or 2 this year as well. So lots to be proud of. And in addition, men's cross country tied their best mark at the CAA championships since we've been in the CAA. They finished 3rd, and we had the 1st and 3rd runner overall in the championships, and we actually had Eric Jenkins qualify for the NCAA's outdoor cross-country championships, and he did quite well. So lots to be proud of, and what's really exciting about what we did in the fall is that many of our teams were laden with underclassmen, and we have strong teams coming back with good recruiting as a result of some of these things that we've accomplished. So I just want to make sure that we don't get into the winter season without giving due credit to our fall teams and congratulate the coaches, the athletes, and everybody associated with those teams for a job well done. Having said that, one of the things that we got from a comment from one of our viewers over the last week or so is whether we would consider adding additional sports to the sports that we currently sponsor. As everybody knows, we currently sponsor 18 sports at the Division I level, and the question was, would we ever consider adding other sports? And the answer is, yeah, sure, we would consider adding additional sports. And I think the question then becomes, well, what do you use for criteria when you're trying to decide whether you would add a sport or not? And so I just want to give you a little bit of insight into what kinds of things we would be considering. It's not an exhaustive list, but I hope it will shed some light on the thought process. One of those questions would be, can we be successful and deliver a positive student-athlete experience by sponsoring that sport? Another would be, how will the additional sport impact our current sports? So with respect to all the support that you have to give each sport, there's a price that you pay with respect to spreading your support staff out too thin in some cases. So you want to make sure that is there an infrastructure in place to support that. And in addition, another question would be, do you have the facilities to support the addition of those sports with all the other things that you're trying to do, which in many ways it comes back to the fundamental question with respect to adding additional sports, which is, are we doing all that we can, or are we satisfied with the support that we're giving to the current sports that we have with respect to operating budget, with respect to facilities, with respect to practice times, with respect to coaching staffs, and all of the things that go with that. Recruiting budgets, there's a lot that has to be considered because I think it would be hard to justify adding additional sports which might then take operating budget away from other sports if they don't feel at this point that we're doing justice to what their needs are in order for them to compete on a fairly equal footing with their peers in the conference and or nationally. So those would be some of the questions that we would be asking ourselves. And then another important one is there interest from the students, from the alumni, and from donors with respect to any of those additional sports. So the other thing that we would want folks to know is that if we were going to add sports, they would certainly likely come from the sports that we already support and sponsor at the club sports level, because we would have some level of interest obviously shown by having a club sport, and the likelihood is that they've had to use some facilities that we already have, and there's an infrastructure in place to some extent already existing. So what I would like to do is, if there are people out there watching this blog that have a strong interest in seeing us add additional sports, I'd love to hear from you either by email or on Twitter. You know, I would be interested in why you think that sport in particular, and just as importantly, I'd also be interested in whether you would be willing to support that sport financially as a donor, because if we are in fact going to add sports, we're certainly going to have to ramp up from a fundraising standpoint, and knowing whether that would be of interest to you would help us as we start to consider all these things. So thank the viewer out there who submitted that request, and we look forward to getting more of those types of inquiries, and hope that we can answer those over the weeks and months that we do the blog going forward. The last thing I just wanted to talk about briefly is, you know, there's continues to be news being made with respect to the situations going on at Penn State and at Syracuse University, and more information continues to come out. There was a report that I heard on the radio this morning with regard to a town hall meeting that was held at Penn State, I think yesterday or the day before, where the president was talking to the folks in attendance about how there has to be a renewed commitment to values and ethics with respect to the campus community, and that there's not just a legal obligation, but there's a moral obligation that we all have with respect to issues like what we've seen on these campuses. And the thing that I just want to emphasize, and I try to talk to people about this all the time when I go speak nationally, or even to our own students when they come in with their first orientation as new student athletes, is the need to keep things in perspective, and to understand our role with respect to the organizations that we're in, the families that we're in, the communities that we're in, and what our role and responsibility might be, and why we need to pursue things for the right reasons and make decisions for the right reasons, and the questions around why we do anything are important in terms of the decisions that we'll make down the road. So, you know, I try to caution people, or try to counsel folks about not waiting until there's a catastrophe in their own life before they put their life in perspective and understand what's really important. We hear that a lot when people are either going through disease and illness in their own family or them personally, and how it makes them focus on what's really important. You hear that phrase used a lot. When we have a war, or people get injured in the war and they come back, and we say these are really the true heroes, and the sports folks that we idolize are not necessarily the heroes. And we even hear that, we heard that after 9/11 from the sports icons out there who have met the first responders or the families that were devastated by the tragedies of 9/11. So they are in fact saying this is the perspective that's healthy, this is who we should be putting up on a pedestal. And when there's scandal, it seems to focus everybody at that point that we need to put our attention towards doing things in the right way, living our lives in the appropriate manner. And the only thing I'll say back to everybody watching this blog today is, why do we have to wait until there's a scandal? Why do we have to wait until there's a tragedy? Why do we have to wait until somebody in our own family or someone that we know has something happen to them before we're willing to give ourselves permission to put our life in perspective? Why do we do that? Why do we feel like it's not appropriate to put our life in perspective every single day? Why don't we wake up and step outside and be happy to be alive and happy to have a family that loves us and happy to have a job that we look forward to going to and feel like that's important enough to protect on a daily basis, and then make decisions that are consistent with that perspective every day? But instead, many times it's human nature, I understand it, we have to wait until we get in a jam before we want to go back and revert to those moral and ethical issues that we know we should have been adhering to from the very beginning. So when we have scandal in the corporate environment, Tyco, WorldCom, Enron, all of a sudden there's a heightened sense of ethics and morals, and all the business schools around the country were touting the fact that they were going to offer programs in ethical leadership and values-driven leadership and all sorts of things. Where was that before all the scandal? Why weren't the business schools touting that as a competitive advantage before all that stuff happened? Was it because it wasn't the popular thing? Was it because it was seen as kind of soft and it wasn't trying to get people to be committed to making money and building wealth and all those kinds of things? Because that's what happens on the college scene too. You know, everybody's chasing the brass ring. We're trying to get to the tournament. We're trying to generate revenue. We're trying to get the best athlete. And then all of a sudden we realize we've lost our focus. We've lost our perspective, and it blows up in our face. And it's only then that we start to remind ourselves of how we should be doing it, who we represent, and the best way to go about doing that. So I've been accused at times of running a social experiment here in the athletic department because of my commitment to a positive student-athlete experience, my commitment to appreciation of difference, and my commitment to keeping college athletics in its proper perspective. Okay? But what I won't be accused of is putting the best interests of winning games ahead of what's in the best interest of the students. And if that's a social experiment, then I'm happily willing to accept that title. So, you know, we need to make sure that we keep our eye focused on what's really important. Relationships, health, happiness, education, and having an opportunity to come to work every day where we can represent a great institution and work with great people. And I know that that's how I feel every day. I do feel a burden of responsibility to represent Northeastern the right way, to represent our student athletes the right way, and to never disappoint anybody that cares enough about me to be interested in what I do. So I'll leave you with that for this week. I hope there's something good there that you can reflect on, and I look forward to hearing from you this coming week in the hopes that maybe I can address some of your interests and concerns the next time we get together. So thanks a lot for tuning in, and go Huskies.